conversation, but I just want to say on the front end that I've been so inspired by you and your example, and I know that so many other people have. And it's a great honor to be able to take a couple hours to talk about your journey and and learn more about your life.
Thank you, Rufus. It was that song that you're talking about, "Green Grow the Rushes Hoe," has been around for a long time. It just started one day. The director of the camp said, "Would you lead this song?" And I realized that this was going to be boring until it was just till things started flying. I thought I'll pick up this kid and I'll wave him around. And I was 280
Yeah, that's
pounds,
right.
6'8", and I'd grab him by his ankle and wave him around. And take off a pair of shoes and throw them out the window, and just it got, and then it got crazier and crazier and crazier. And being that, um again, one of the things I realized about myself along the way was that I'm not, there are a lot of iterations of me. Okay, there are a lot of, and the five major places along the continuum. On the right hand side is the artist, okay, the creator, the
Mm.
poet, the person who likes to be the singer, the songwriter. The next stage over is the minister, and that's the helper, that's the carer, that's the caretaker. The middle place for me is my teacher. That's what I am. I'm a teacher. It's just I'm a damn teacher.
Yeah.
The next stage over is my cowboy. Okay. And the cowboy likes to get at no more rules. Let's get out of Dodge. Let's do this.
Uh-huh.
Let's have some fun. Let's just go wild. And the last
Yeah.
stage over is the warrior. And the warrior says, if we have to stand up and fight for what we have to fight for, we have to stand up for, this is wrong. This is not right.
Right.
And so I realize, because a camp becomes a reflection of yourself as a director. And I realized that a lot of camps just hit one place, especially the competitor or the, but I realized if we're doing this well, then I'm going to provide kids an opportunity to be all those different things, all the
Yes.
way from their warrior to their creator to their poet, back to the cowboy, back to the this, and so that's what you really want to do, is give kids all those. And to do that, one of my favorite expressions always is, if you want to see a man, you have to be him. If you want to be a man, you have to see a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can't tell them how to do it. You have to show them how to do it.
Right.
And,
Right.
and as an extension of that, some of the best moments I ever had as a camp director teaching boys was when I was in tears. And I'd be
Wow.
I'd be giving a talk at chapel or something else, and something would just hit me, and I just cry.
Mm. Yeah.
And these kids would look up and see, here's Barnes, again, 280 pounds, six foot
Right.
eight. If it's like Rosie Greer, if Barnes can cry, I can cry.
Yeah.
And so really those moments were just, I never regretted them. It gave kids permission to be things they didn't necessarily have permission to be in their normal life. And it also said, be the person you want to be, because this is who you are. And we will love you for that. And that's what camp is about. You come be the person you want to be, and we'll love you for that. So yeah.
I love that. I felt that as a camper and young counselor, I think a total of 10 summers, and I really think it fundamentally nourished me and changed my life path. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And what an incredible thing to be a part of, you know. But well, I am so curious about, I've heard different, about different parts of your history, but I've never heard the whole story. And I'm really curious to hear it. I'm curious about whether this, what you describe as this continuum from, you know, warrior and cowboy to teacher, minister, and artist. Uh, how much of that developed over the course of your life? In my imagining, it was always my impression that you were more of a cowboy in your early years. I mean, I'm sure that's continued. I'm sure this cowboy is still in you, undoubtedly. But maybe could we start at the beginning? Could you tell us about, your life history, where it all began, and your what your adolescence was like, and your and what emerged first?
Uh, well, I will start off by saying, I was not an easy child. Okay. Some people say I'm not an easy adult, but I take that as a compliment. Um, I grew up in Westchester County, New York, in Pleasantville, and my dad was, if you ever seen the TV show Mad Men.
Oh yeah. Oh
Well,
yeah.
that was my life. I mean,
Amazing.
that could have been about my father and our family. It could have been a direct biography of our family. And I went to 9 different schools before I got to college. Um, and I was on disciplinary probation 5 days after I got there. I didn't even make it through freshman orientation. And much of that had to do with just feeling lost and just feeling not knowing where I was and not feeling grounded. There was a point in my life when I made a shift from we used to have a phrase at Lanakila called they used to say back in the 50s, we pledge allegiance to Lanakila and to the ideas from which it stands.
Wow.
And I remember there was a point in my life where I switched my allegiance from my family to camp. Okay,
Interesting.
I switched my allegiance because my family was not dependable. My family was not going to get me when I needed. That became pretty clear.
Right.
But camp was a place where it was going to get me. It was consistent. It was honest. I was not as a boy, I was not just a defective girl. I couldn't.
Right.
And so it was just a magic place for me.
And you started there in what year, and how old were you?
7 years old, 1953, 8 weeks,
Wow.
and loved it,
Yeah.
and loved every minute of it. Loved every minute of it. And so then I went to different schools, none of which with my brothers. It was always sort of private schools to see if we can find the right place for Barnes. Um, and then I went to Middlebury and pretty much was um, an active alcoholic throughout the whole thing. Alcoholism was really about 16, alcoholism kicked in. And then the shit show really began. Um, and college was just college. And but I played football and I played professional football for 3 days
Yeah.
based on that, which was just kind of a lark. And then
So,
went to
but
teach set.
you must have been pretty good though. You must have been pretty good at the football, and in order to be pretty, I mean, you must have for some period of time. Did you have the drinking under control for some period of time? And was there,
Well,
and then did it spiral? And
the
yeah,
football story is kind of funny because I only played 2 years,
huh.
never played high school, never played, but I went to college and they finally convinced me to play. Well, the first time I ended up on the program to go to other schools, to be sent to other schools, I was said 6'8", 285 pounds. This is the first time this guy as a junior, and they're going,
Yeah.
I think your program has a mistake on it. And like, no, there's no mistake. But I was big. I wasn't good, but I was big. I was at one point at that point, I was the tallest person in the NFL for 3
Wow.
days.
Wow.
But it was very clear after going there that this was not anything I had any business being a part of. And so came back, went to work in a garage, and then went to work, teach fourth and fifth grade, and then did that for 2 years. And finally, I had to go back and get certified because I'd never been certified. I did everything sort of in the back door. It was like, and went to UMass, got a doctorate, and then all of a sudden,
Got a doctorate in what?
education. So I was teacher education. So I was now teaching courses I'd never taught. I mean, I was teaching courses I'd never taken. But it was exciting and it was new and it was good. And I was good. I'm a good teacher. And then went to work at the University of Cincinnati. That's when, at the end of that, is when my alcoholism bottomed out, got sober in 75, and everything changed after that. So, yeah. And everything changed after that. That was the single most important event in my life, was getting sober.
Wow. And to the extent that you want to share it, how dark were the low points there? What did it take? Did it take other people to help you see that you needed to make
There
this
was
big
never
change?
there was never an intervention per se. It was just it just was so dark and so lonely and so and everything you wanted to be, you were seeing yourself. I want, I want to be a good father. I want to be a good brother. I want to be a good husband. I want to be, and I was trading all that away. I was trading every bit of my every bit of my character. I'll just trade that like a loan. Okay, I'll trade it, and pretty soon there was nothing left to trade. I was just empty. I was just empty, and I actually got fired from Lanakila in '75. I had been assistant director, and Paul, the director, and my best friend let me go, which I think was one of the hardest things he ever had to do. And came back 4 years later um, with a vengeance and brought a system of counseling which we called success counseling.
Success counseling. And what's
And
amazing about that, Barnes, I didn't know about that timing, 1970, because 1979 was my first year in
uh,
Woodside
okay,
at the age of 12.
and
So
that was my
1979. So that was your first year back.
yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, amazing. And
And
do you think that and do you think that time off? I mean, what's interesting, I was asked not to come back to Lana Keeler, to skip 1 year because of I'd broken some rules. And boy, that was one of the most kind of humbling moments of my life. But it did cause me to respect the camp and respect the values and the seriousness with which they were taken. Um, in a way that I think was probably healthy. And it almost seemed like it was not uncommon that as a young counselor, if you colored outside the lines too much, Paul Pilcher or you would sit down at the end of the year and say, "Hey, you did these things well. You didn't do these things well. You broke a rule you can't break. You know, you need to take next year off." Like I recall that quite a few people getting that message, and probably it seemed to be effective. I mean, when you look back on it, do you think that Paul made the right decision to
oh,
ask you?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, it would have been horrible for everybody. I think the last year was not very good. And no, I really respected him. He said, "You can come back in '77." And I said, "I'm not ready yet. When I come back, I want to come back 100%. I want to come back ready to take this thing on and show you, basically I didn't say to him, but to say to myself, I want to show you the person I know I can be." And I think that's what happens when people are asked to take a year off or even get fired. A significant number of people who've been fired from camp have come back and said, "Can I please come back again?" Because they want to prove to you that in a place where they know they've been respected and honored and treated well, that they screwed up and they want to come back and make it right. And giving people a chance to make it right is um, all part of loving them. I mean, I realized recently that it's just an awareness that I've had for a long time, that I really understand now, that I really believe I should never diminish somebody's status as a way to solve a problem, no matter what the problem is.
Mm.
Words, I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to take you apart. I'm not going to, even if I have to criticize you, but we're not going to solve this problem by diminishing your status, which is very different from the way the rest of the world operates, as you know.
That's amazing. I'm writing that down. That's I mean, that does sound possible, doesn't it? That you can criticize people, you can take actions that are necessary to protect yourself, and without diminishing other people's status, right?
Right. You have to say, "Here's what I see, and here's what I'm going to do." I mean, a big part of, there's so many things tied together here in terms of what campus allowed me to do, because each year you come back, what stays the same is camp, and it's a mirror. And you look in the mirror and say, "Okay, here's who I am. Here's who I was last year. Here's who I am this year. Who do I want to be this next year?" Then you come back the next year and look in the mirror and say, "Okay, here's who I was last year. Who do I want to be this year?" And one of the major things that I've seen is one of the things that makes creates so many problems in the world is that people do not know how to have difficult conversations with each other. They
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
they avoid them. They just don't want to have them. They just think it's going to be terrible and it's going to hurt,
Yeah.
and they don't know how to tell the truth to people without being critical. I mean, there's a line we used to teach people in training, which was, suppose your wife or your husband or somebody was criticizing you, and we would teach them to say, "Can you tell me what you want without telling me what I'm doing wrong?" And that was just a showstopper for some people. They didn't know how to say what they wanted without telling them what they were doing wrong. You do
Right.
this, and so learning how to speak my truth. And I have a kind of a mantra, which is show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and release the outcome. And those things have served me very well. But telling the truth is not easy. And what it's come down to me is if I'm going to speak my truth, there's a difference between speaking my truth and telling the truth. Speaking my truth involves saying, here's what I see, here's what I think when I see that, and here's what I feel when I think that. And that's it. And
Yeah.
there's no argument to it because I'm not telling you anything about your reality. I'm not telling you what you think or feel, or I'm just saying, when I see this, here's what I say to myself. And when I say that, here's what I think. And then I'm clear. And it's very lovely to be able to speak your truth. And it's been a joy. I mean, it's part of what makes this part of my life so nice is that there are not a lot of relationships I have to go clean up. You know.
The so going into this conversation, I asked if there were three parts of your life or stories from your life that you thought were kind of most instructive in terms of what made you who you are, uh, and and you came up with Lanakila, your time in Lanakila, your time in Yugoslavia as a teacher in the early 1950s, and your current stage at the end of your life, and all that that entails. And so we'll talk about each of these, but and we started to talk about your Lana Kila journey, but just treating that as a first kind of topic and phase of your life. Um, you know, I'll just say as a preface that Lana Kila just was completely transformative for me and so many people that I know, and I'm now watching it with my friends' kids. It's just amazing, and I think that for me, and there's so much of you in that camp, today and when I was there. And for me, what made Lanakila different was that the world that I lived in was a what I would describe as a zero sum game world in which in the high school I went to, the schools I went to, they were very competitive, and they give you a class rank 1 to 84, and there was a sense that your value in the world was was something that you were competing with the people around you to establish your value, to increase your value. Your value in the world was always at risk, and that when your value went up, other people's went down by comparison. And that's an ugly, ugly world,
Oh,
that
oh,
this zero sum world. I got to Lanakila and I looked around and I was like, this is an entirely different culture. It seems that everyone here believes that we can all grow in parallel, victory over oneself. And there's a belief here in a non-zero sum world, we can all grow and get stronger and get, become more valuable to each other and more useful and experience more joy. And there's no diminishment that's necessary. And that, I mean, I could not have articulated it when I was 12 years old or 13 or 14 or even 16, 18, 19. But when I look back on it, it basically presented to me an alternative way to think about how humans can interact in the world and navigate the world,
yep.
and a better way to do it. And so I guess I would just start as an initial question to say, when you arrived there in 1953, was that sensibility already there? How did you see the camp evolve, and how was your experience uh, as a young boy and teenager interacting with Lanakila?
Well, when I got there, as I say, it was. I stepped off the bus as a 7-year-old who didn't really know what was going on. And there all of a sudden I was in this community of men who were acting with integrity and with love, and they were strong, but they weren't overbearing. They weren't interested. Didn't let me get away with stuff,
Yeah.
but they didn't do it critically. They just says, we just don't do that here. Or, it's no, I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
we just, that's not how we handle that. And they laughed and they had fun and they understood fart jokes and they understood, roughhousing, and they understood all those things, and they participated in that with you and celebrated your little, whether it was a bed made well or, whether you went up a mountain, they celebrated you. They saw you. See, the Rufus, they saw you. I was seen, and I came to camp and I'd be seen, and then I'd go home and I wouldn't be seen anymore.
Right.
And then I would come back to camp and I'd be seen again. It was nourishing. And see, for me, then I kept coming back and took 5 years off because we moved to California at one point. But Lanakil is, when I learn something, and I would call myself a pretty voracious learner. I love to learn, especially about human behavior.
Yeah.
And anything I learned, I could immediately put it into practice with a community of 270 people. So if I learned something about truth, or I learned something about honesty, or I learned something about fear, I can immediately find a way to put that into the mix and watch people. Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that, or that's cool, or yeah, or or just correct people's thinking. You were saying, people would say, let's say a riflery counselor is talking to another riflery counselor, saying, these kids are signing up they're signing up to come to rifle and they're not coming. What are we going to do to make them come to riflery? Say, whoa, no, wrong question. Well, what do you mean they're not coming? I said, I didn't say that was the wrong question. I said, the wrong question is, what are we going to do to make them come to riflery? The question is, how can we create a riflery program in which kids will say, it's important that we be there on time because it affects other people. And that's who we want to be. That's the question you want to be asking. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, how are we supposed to do that? That's 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 the question. And when you figure that, and so how do we do that? If you wanted to create a riflery program where kids would say it's important that I get there, how would you do that? Well, then you teach them a concept. The concept being that everybody does the best they can with the information they have at the time. So you're not trying to change behavior, you're trying to change information. So you give them information, just so you know, if you don't show up to riflery, that means somebody else doesn't get a chance to go who really wants to go. Just so you know, if you let us know a half an hour ahead of time, we can find somebody else. Just so you know, once they began to change the information kids were getting, and because kids essentially want to be good, they want to be respected, they want to feel the way they're supposed to feel as human beings, the whole system would begin to change. So now you're looking at a very different way of processing that. And one of the most fun things was people used to come back they'd go away from camp and they'd go back to their colleges or whatever, and they'd come back and they'd be on committees or things like that. And they'd come back to me in the summer, they'd say, God, they said, I was in this committee to do this. And they didn't even ask why we were here. They didn't even ask, why are we doing this? I couldn't believe it, because they're so used to saying, okay, first why?
Yeah.
Okay, first why, then what? Not what, then why? And
Right.
and you wouldn't notice it, but you see, this camp is a springboard to everything here that happens. Is if you go to most organizations that deal with children, the questions they ask about everything are, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? Okay, how are we going to handle this? What are we going to do now? And Lana Keela flips that around, and it goes from what are we going to do to who we're going to be. And if we can figure out who we're going to be, then you can ask the question, okay, if we were being that, what would we be doing? If we were being that, what would we be doing? So the doing is a function of the being. And that's very unusual for a whole organization to be to be based on. And everybody, when you teach everybody to talk that language, which you can do in a closed environment like camp, where you only meet 2 months a year and you have all sorts of controls you don't have in other organizations, it's pretty powerful. Pretty
And
powerful.
so you were there as a young camper. You took 5 years off when your family moved to California. Did you
Yep.
come back as a counselor? How old were you when you came back, and what was that experience like as a young counselor?
17 years old, and was a junior counselor in a tent with a man named Peter Gardner. And Peter Gardner was a Maine guide. He was like 40. I was 20. He was like 40. But he was an amazing. I mean, he was just one of these people that transformed. He totally transformed the canoeing department, where we moved to tump lines, we moved to portaging, we moved to poling up rapids, we moved to all sorts of things you just never ever would do. And he was an amazing human being. He'd lost a child, um, and he was just one of the role models that I said, I want to be like that person. See, that my job as a director was always to hire a sort of panoply of people that any number of kids could say, I want to be like that person. They wouldn't do any good to have them all be the same, which you get a lot of times at a sports camp or something else. But we had, you as a counselor were very creative and very effusive and sort of running around in your tie-dye t-shirt and dancing down at the art, I never forget you dancing down on the athletic field, and kids would just mob you just to be around that kind of energy. It was so different and so unique and so fun and so without rules and just, but then the nice thing was, then they don't just keep doing that. They say, okay, that's then. We also have to go and show up at dinner on time. And we also have to, there's other things. And they can exist at the same time. It's
Well,
not
one of the things that to me was so magical about camp was that you had, something like, 30 different examples of what it looked like to be a man, as you would say,
right,
right? That you're and of course, to a 13-year-old, there's nobody who's more impressive than a 17-year-old.
right.
You know, and to a 17-year-old, there's nobody who's more impressive than a 21-year-old or whatever, and on and on. But and one of the things that struck me is that part of that magic is that maybe when you think about, I was talking with an anthropologist about all that we've learned from the 80 different hunter-gatherer tribes that have been studied around the world about how humans used to live together. And humans, based on all available evidence, lived in, tribes of, bands of, 40 to 150 people, who were extended relatives usually. And the kids in all these societies, the kids would flow around the community on their own, and they would see all these different role models of what it meant to be a man or what it meant to be a woman. And there was a lot of co-parenting and a lot of sort of you didn't isolate little families of four
Right.
people in a white box and say this is your only choice for a role model, which frankly is doomed for failure. For in most cases for both the parent and the child, right? Because
Absolutely.
people are so different. So I think it strikes me that one piece of the magic of summer camps in general is just going back to something more like the way we live together in
Mhm.
our ancestral environment, where we have this, a lot of different people taking responsibility for children becoming adults. And there's something beautiful about that. Then on top of that, I think Camp Lanakila had some and continues to have some very special magic above and beyond most camps, right? That includes, the success counseling that you brought to it, and a lot of a deep philosophy about how we're going to interact with each other and what our core job is. Our core job is not to teach kids the J stroke, or how to shoot a bow and arrow, right? I mean, that's something that we do, but the
That's
core
the
job.
vehicle. That's the vehicle to help them learn how to lose, help them learn how to deal with failure, to help them learn how to be, to try when when you want to give up. It's the vehicle to help them learn all the lessons that they need to learn to be a successful human being. And it went back when I came to camp, it was a matriarchal society run by the Hewlett family, and it seemed like everything was magic. It was just magic.
Mm.
But see, the whole point of us taking over, and the whole point of this, the change in moving from the 50s to the 70s, we had to figure out how to teach what it was. What is that magic?
You had to reverse engineer the magic.
Right. You had to reverse engineer the magic. Okay. So, and how do we, because if we can't teach it to people, if we can't tell them what it is and how to do it, then it's just you wait for the magic and that's it. And we really did that very, very well. Um, and,
And
and
who was the team that did that?
well, it came from me because I'd learned, reality therapy. I'd learned a whole lot of things from a man named William Glasser, which was all inside out psychology. Um, and which was basically not you don't feel what you feel because of what's outside you. You feel what you feel because when things happen to you, you tell yourself a certain story. And so when you tell yourself story X, this kid hates me, then you feel this. If you tell yourself he made a mistake, he's just been having a bad day, you feel something else. So that your choice is a story you tell yourself about what's going on. And so we spent a lot of time talking to kids about, so um, especially Billy told me I couldn't play kickball anymore, and it really made me mad. Okay, so you might say, so okay, so I'm just curious. Do you want to be friends with kickball? Do you want to be friends with Billy? Do you want to play
Yeah.
kickball again? Yeah. Okay. So if you were the friend you say you want to be, what do you think you might do in this situation? Now, the first time you asked them that question, it looked like you just stepped out of a spaceship from Mars because
Right.
they just have never been asked that question before. What kind of a friend do you want to be? And if you were that kind of a friend, what would you do? The 10th time, the 20th time, the 50th time, by everybody around you in the community asking that same question. I don't know. If you were a good friend to Billy and he hurt your feelings, what would you do? Would you throw a rock at him? Well, no. Well, what would a friend do? They'd go tell him he was mad. Okay, so if we could figure out a way for you to tell Billy you're mad, would that be better than what you're doing now? Well, yeah, I guess so. So all of a sudden they're solving problems based on who they want to be, not based on what Billy's doing. And it's the biggest transformation you can possibly allow in kids.
And those lessons and that kind of, you know, iterative, collaborative process of understanding what the problem is, figuring out who you want to be, how you can better taking ownership of solving the problem and improving yourself. That's a process that the young counselors, of course, I mean, now as a 56-year-old, I look back on it and think of the now if I go to Lana Kela, the counselors to me are kids, 'cause
Yeah,
we're older now, but the and now I see you have these different layers of different, ages and levels of maturity, but the young counselors are still learning too, right? I mean,
absolutely.
they're learning by teaching, but they're learning from the older counselors who are in turn and the leadership, uh, helping them work through their challenges and become better communicators.
Right. Because why would I do that? I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to help you learn so that we can keep this beautiful dream going. We can keep this beautiful place alive. And it's not going to do it unless we each help each other pass that information along institutionally and individually. And it's so funny because, when people get there, the 16-year-olds think they're about the hottest thing that ever lived, and the 18-year-olds think they're so cool, and the 21-year-olds are just graduating from college and they think they're just the best, and then the 30, And you give it about 2 or 3 days and during pre-camp, and like it all sort. Okay, you're 16. You're not 18. You're 18. You're not 21. There's always somebody above you that's got more experience, and you are cool, but you're not 21, and it sorts itself out so nicely. And then the
Yeah.
16-year-old can be a 16-year-old. He doesn't have to be a 21-year-old. He can just be a damn 16-year-old, which most 16 and get treated with respect and do a real job and get trusted with responsibility. That freaks them out. These are real jobs. They're really responsible for things that are, that could cause problems. And when you turn to a 16-year-old, they walk into your office and say, "What do you think I should do about this?" And you say, "Well, I don't know. Why don't you make that decision?" And they look at you like, "Holy crap. This guy just said me. Nobody ever turned to me in school and says, 'Why don't you make that decision?'" Oh my God. And it just builds and builds and builds and builds. And as director, what I realized my job was, and I think this is true for people in general, is you have a chance in a day to do 100 nice things for people. Just 100 nice things for people. You have that position and the power to be able to make that happen. And what a joy. What a joy for you, what a joy for them. And you don't lose any. I used to say to the staff, you know how much power I have? I have enough power to give every one of you in this room the power you need, and I still have power left over. That's how much power I have. And it's not a finite amount of power that I have to hold on to. Um, and so I want to empower you to do what you want to do, and I want you to do something that, and then to go back to the why again, and the why, because our overall goal as a camp, and it has been since 1922, is to help create fine people. That's your job. And there was um, I'm sure you know of him. I forget his name right now. A psychologist who said the boys will settle in when they know three things: who's in charge, what are the rules, and what's the mission. And until they know those three things, they will keep acting and misbehaving and misacting in order to find that out. And a lot of times, especially with boys and men, they think the big thing is, well, tell them who's in charge and what are the rules. But see, the most important thing is,
Right.
what's the mission? Why am I
Um,
here? What are we trying to do? And that's when you give these kids that mission. Oh my God, our job is to help create fine people, and I can be part of that. They just blossom. They just open up, like they just blossom.
yeah. My 16-year-old son went to camp uh, at 13 for a year. And I said to him going in, I said, Gray, this is a place where he was very upset about the dress code that he wasn't going to be able to wear his cool clothes. I said, Gray, this is actually a place where it's not about wearing the cool clothes, and it's also a place where people aren't sarcastic and they don't make fun of each other. There's still lots of humor and play, but not at people's expense. And he turned to me and he said, Dad, there's a problem with that. That's impossible because there's this thing, you might have heard of it. It's called human nature. And making fun of people is part of human nature. So that's a nice idea, but that's just categorically impossible. And so the first letter I get from him says, Dad, everything you said about this place is true. Uh, and it's I remember as both as a camper and then as a young counselor, watching it take about a week for the new campers who came in, and maybe from the old campers who'd forgotten that kids would make fun of each other and be sarcastic at in a way that was diminishing, and the young counselors would just pull them aside and say, that's not how we do things here. And it would take about something like a week
Yeah.
for kids to make those adjustments, but you would feel this palpable lifting up, and the smiles emerging on faces, and just like a change. And uh, uh, what to me is so exciting about that, and to this day, at the age of 56, not having been at camp for decades, it reminds me that communities and the rules by which humans interact with each other are totally, there are many, many different kinds of communities and ways people can interact with each other. And um, so I think that's so powerful. And it sounds like you're saying that that was there when you were a young camper in the 50s. And
Well,
but you think it became more intentional. It became more intentional over time.
everything became more intentional. Everything became more intentional. And the concept we used to talk about was victimless humor.
Yes,
So
yes.
there was a concept that people could grab hold on, and you teach counselors victimless humor. It's not about getting over on somebody. And you can have people laugh at themselves, and that's part of it. But that's not the way we're gonna, you don't have to be better than somebody else. And there are basically two ways people try and be better than. The way I win, there are two ways in a dualistic society. There are two ways to win. One is to win, and the other is to have you lose. Because if you
Right.
lose,
Yeah.
I must be winning because that's the only other spot that's open. So, um, and it's very funny and to make fun of yourself and to laugh and to and there's a difference too between people say, you mean they never make fun of themselves, they never make fun of other kids? No, that's not the point. There's issues and there are incidents. you know is criticism and sarcasm an issue at camp? No. Are there incidents? Absolutely. There'll always be incidents. But that's a difference between having an issue with sarcasm. We don't have an issue with sarcasm. So, I mean, you're never going to wipe all that out. Your son is right. You can't wipe that out. But what do you do when it happens? Do you land on people? Do you teach them? Do you punish them? Do you think of them as stupid? Do you think of them as bad? Do you think of them as just needing new information? Do you think of them and every way you think of them creates another emotion. And so the question is, if we trusted these kids to be trying to do the best they can with the information they have, what would be our next step in terms of this situation? Well, we go sit down with these kids in a cabin and we go have a conversation. Well, we don't have time for that. Well, we didn't make time for that. This is the most important thing these kids may experience the whole summer, is that we care about how they treat each other. And if they have to sit in their tent and talk about this for an hour, then they have to sit and talk about it for an hour. If we have to get back to it, we'll get back to it. But and you get, my son Adam was a unit head with the 12 and 13-year-olds, and 12 and 13-year-olds are kind of classic screw ups for boys. I mean, it's a very, very, very hard age, and they make a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes. And so he would just take those mistakes and just work with them and work with them and work with them and work with them, almost waiting for them to happen so he could take it and transform it into something that was um, nourishing rather than punishing. And it was exciting. It's exciting to watch these kids change the way they see the world.
The um, one of many wonderful camp memories I have was that there was this tradition, of course, that when a counselor overslept, which would happen because, of course, we young counselors would go out and to bonfires and there with the cute girls from Aloha down the street, and you know, sometimes not get enough sleep, and you know that bugle in the morning was sometimes tough on the young counselors. And so some of them would sometimes oversleep, and we'd be eating breakfast, and there'd be whispering going around, a little bit of excitement, and then it would be announced that there was a counselor sleeping, and the whole camp would march down and sing the song and pour and deliver cereal to the counselor, which in the form of, it was probably originally milk and Cheerios or whatever it was, but then it turned to water because we couldn't exactly pour milk on their sheets. But they'd pull up the tent flaps and they'd have the whole camp surrounding them singing the song, and pouring the stuff, and they would end up laughing, but and everybody loved it. But the brilliance in that was that it was actually this, like, it was both a joyful moment and a humorous moment, but it was also a way of saying, like, we have standards.
Right.
Sir, we're not going to let you sleep. We're not going to let you sleep in, but we're going to make this a teachable moment.
And fun.
That's really hard to do in life, right? To actually, like, deliver tough messages in a way that gives everyone participating. Even the counselor who's covered in water, eventually, once they shake it off, everybody sort of enjoys it on some level.
Well, and he's the center of attention the whole day. I mean, he's the center of
Yeah,
attention the whole day, and he's got
yeah,
this. People remember that, and they don't sleep in twice. That's the other thing.
yeah,
They don't sleep in twice. Yeah, as you say, it takes work and energy to find a way to solve those problems with love and fun rather than power and anger. And most people aren't willing to put in the energy, but that's the payoff long term. One of the things that I've learned recently is about doing the right thing. And I realized that the right thing always takes more time, always costs more money, and it's always harder.
right.
Okay. It's just,
Wow.
it's doing the right thing always is those three things. So I want to say to people, okay, well, except for those three things, why would we not do the right thing? Because it's just a given. It's always harder, it's always costs more money, and it always takes more time in the short term. But in the long term, if you stay around long enough, you see the benefits of this, you see the payoff, you see oh my God, aren't we glad we did this? Aren't we glad we did this? So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to push people to do the right thing and to have the ability as a leader to say, we haven't got this yet. No, we keep working on this. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like who we are. But well, we got to do this. Well, no, we don't got to do anything. We got to get it right. And let's work at that. And then you finally get it right and you go, oh my God, that was really worth the energy. And people feel good. They experience the wonderful feeling that comes from doing something right and treating people the right way. And that then they never want to go back. They never want to go back. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't do it.
How was your transition from being a young counselor to becoming part of leadership and then becoming director, assistant director, director? Was that a personal journey for you? Were you always sure that that's what you wanted? You know, how do you think about that journey?
That journey was as natural as it was. It was just what I was supposed to be doing. And when Paul left, he'd been director for 20 years. He and I were best friends, and he was director for 20 years. And he thought I'd stay on for a year or two. You were 2 or 3, I think, and then I'd go into this fair night. And but it was the job I was meant to do, Rufus. It was when you hit it. I pray that my vocation and my avocation may so unite as my two eyes and sight. And that's what it was for me. That just was. It was my life. It was my chance to do good. It was my opportunity to learn and to take that learning and pass it on. It was my opportunity to be the kind of man I wanted to be, and then share that with others. I mean, what could you not like about the job? And we just did some things like when I took over camp, for example, we had like 4 women on staff. I don't know if you remember back then, but there were a
Yeah,
couple,
I do.
couple of wives, and when I left, there were 22 women on staff.
Yeah, those 4 women got a lot of attention, as I remember.
Yeah, yeah,
You'd have like one arts and crafts person and a
yeah.
nurse. And yeah,
But we had 22 women on staff, and it really changed
that's great.
because if you ask the question, if we are seriously interested, and this is the why question, if we're
Yeah,
seriously interested in creating good, strong, loving men, let's start off with that's what we're trying to do. One of the things that those boys need to do is have relationships with women who are not their mother and not their teacher, because their mother and their teacher are always trying to get them to do stuff. I mean, other
yeah,
things are mixed in
yeah,
there, but they're
yeah,
always trying to get them to do stuff. And then boys react to that because they don't like to be controlled. And then they carry that reaction and that rebellion into their marriages and into their relationships with other women. And
Mhm.
it just
Yeah,
goes on and on and on. So
yeah,
when you say to these women, well, what's my job? Your job is just to be a woman, just to be
yeah,
and let these kids react to you. And I mean, one of the most fun things I had was, I'd say, and if you get in a situation with a boy where it feels uncomfortable or something else, come see me. And I'm not going to take the problem from you. I'm going to help you go back and solve it with him. So when you're done, you will have your status, he will have his status, and you'll feel really good about the way you handled yourself. And they would come in and say, this kid did this. Okay, well, pull him off on the side. Here's what you say. Here's what you do. Schedule a follow-up. Bam, bam, bam. And they'd come back. They said, that was so good. We're just really close now. We're really good friends. And he's not making those stupid comments anymore. It's like, yes, yes.
Amazing. Amazing.
Amazing, amazing, amazing.
And
Yeah.
how, when you talk about it being the dream job, which I can, sounds exactly right. I would think one of the harder pieces of it would be the 9 months when camp is not in session. And I mean, obviously, it takes a huge amount of preparation. There's a lot that needs to be done. It's an organization to run. But I wonder about, to me, one of the big questions is how do we take this, the spirit of this amazing magical place, Camp Lanakila, and distribute that more broadly into the world? How do we turn the world into this camp? you know, and
Right.
that's something that I imagine you spent some time thinking about it and maybe acting on. But how do you think about that? About where does the boundary between Lanakila and the world, begin?
It's really an individual transformational. You can't do
Yeah,
without the individual transformation. It's not reformational. It's not just moving things around in a different way. It's really understanding your relationship to how you feel and what's going on around you, and beginning to understand that um, I'm responsible for how I feel here. I mean, people would say all the time to me, I'll ask them a question. They'll say, well, you really want me to tell you the truth? And I say, yeah, I mean, your job is to tell me the truth. My job is to figure out a way to how to handle the truth. Don't try and do my job. Let me do my job. Okay. And my job is to tell you the truth, and your job is to figure out how to deal with it. And you can be angry about it. You can believe in it. You can be grateful for it. You have to decide how you want to feel about me telling you the truth. Because until you decide how you want to feel about that, you are not in charge of your own life, and you're going to be drifting and floating and aimless and lonely, very lonely, very lonely. So it's really, I mean, obviously it's shifting. It's already shifting. We're moving away from, um, I think we're at we are at, unfortunately, a very critical, very crucial time in our country, some of which has to do with understanding personal responsibility and stop trying to control everybody else to get them, because people, coercion, and people are trying to coerce everybody. The basic truism here is coercion invites resistance. Coercion invites resistance.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, um, but those two energies are shifting in this country, and I hope we can move in the direction of personal responsibility rather than power and coercion, because it's going to be a rough time if we don't. It takes more work. It takes harder. But in the long run, it's what gives people that sense of we're human beings, and we are designed to. There's a way we can feel, and I love what your son said about dad. That doesn't exist because, like most people, he's limited by his own imagination. He's not limited by reality. He's limited by his imagination of reality. And when
Yeah.
you get, you know, I mean, it goes back to another situation in camp. So one of the things, if you had a good coach in a baseball team, okay, the coach would sit down before the game and say, okay, or as part of the training, whatever, and say, okay, now this is going to be a tough game. I want to ask you a question. Do you want to walk off this team winners? Walk off this field as winners? The kids would say, oh yeah, of course, okay. So we only have to figure out two things: how we're going to walk off as winners if we win, and how we're going to walk off as winners if we lose. And those are the two things we have to figure out.
That's great.
Now, that question alone stretches a kid's imagination. I mean, I can lose.
Yeah, yeah.
I can lose and walk off the field a winner. Yeah, you can lose and walk off the field a winner. And that's what you begin to open up. That's what you begin to allow kids to confront their own lack of imagination rather than acting as though it's fact and set in stone.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's wonderful. The you know, here's a question that you can either answer or not answer depending on your preference. Every institution has challenges. You know, Lanakila has had its own set of challenges over the years. Any reflections on what we've learned from those challenges over the years?
I would say reflections on what we've learned and haven't learned. It's you can do maintaining a system of goodness and light and honesty is a very precarious position. I mean, it's not easy to do. It has to be done with both it has to be done with both that artist, but that warrior has to step in every once in a while, just say, no, 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 we're not doing this. That's a no, no. And I will fight for that. But you have to be able to, it's just very precarious. And if you get somebody in there like some leaders in some places, and we've had our share of people who don't see the hardest cycle to break into is, I forget what his name was, but he said, if you don't know, you don't know, you think you know. If you don't know, you think, how do you break into that? Okay, because if you don't know, you think you know, you think you know. So where does that cycle, where is there opening in that cycle for you to get in there and break that open? And so a lot of people, not a lot, thank God, but a fair number of people who think they know, but don't know, and then get into positions of power and are able to make decisions that really are not part of, they think they are. They think they're doing it, but they're not. They're missing it. And they don't know they're missing it. That's what's scary is because they're really sure they're getting it. And no, that's not it. That's not it. Just make them do this. We'll just, I remember the business manager, we have discussions about counselors being out too late or whatever, and there were incidents, not issues. Again, we did not have a problem with counselor misbehavior at night. There were incidents, of course, but the business manager would be at a meeting and she'd say, well, just tell them to come in on time. It's like, wow, I never thought about that. What a creative solution. It's like, no, you don't just tell people what to do when they do it. It's not what happens. You have to sometimes lay down the law, and you have to sometimes say, I can't let you go out at night until we have a figure. You're not following through on the rule, and so I have to ask you to not go out at night until we figure this out. Well, what if I can't figure it out? Well, then you won't be going out at night. Well, what if I can figure it out? Then you can go out tonight, but we got to figure it out. And that's the bottom line in discipline. Not this is going to happen to you, but we have to work this out. We have to work this out. And if you can't impose that, especially with schools, they just can't do it. They can't do it with teachers. There's no discipline with teachers. You got no discipline with teachers, you're not going to have discipline with kids. And there are a lot of people in situations who don't really know how to do that. But we just need to work it out. Well, what do we mean work it out? So you can get what you want and I can get what I want. And once we figure that out, we're good. We can go.
Yeah.
So
The power for me as a young counselor at Lanakila who occasionally stayed out too late and enjoyed all the antics of the young counselors in the evenings. I do think that being asked not to come back one summer um, caused me to realize how much I valued the camp experience.
right.
And and even if I didn't necessarily agree with every last rule or every last policy, that I love this place enough to, you know, um, to go along with whatever the policies were, because I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to help build it and be part of making it better. And it's occurred to me that actually you were talking about the country and the limitations, the challenges we have as a country. And it occurred to me that, as young, there are a lot of disaffected young people, you know, uh, who don't necessarily feel that it's necessary for them to vote, or they're not sure who to vote for, et cetera. Not to make this at all political, but really the that if we were to say, you know, when you turn 18, you have to basically decide if you want to be an American citizen and apply, and we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but you have to earn it a little bit, right? Like we all have to, you know, you have to work in order to have a community, whether it's a school or a summer camp or a country that that has values and principles. There's a sense that like it's special to be a member of that community
Right.
and shouldn't be
That's it.
necessarily taken for granted, right? And that I think provides the leverage that makes it possible to have all those conversations and have people take them seriously.
Well, and I said it with the staff. You could not ask staff at camp to do what they do for anything but love. It's just too much work and it's too hard. They have to have the love. They have to love what's going on. As you said, it has to be worth it. And it's not just smoke and mirrors. There has to be something that I say, it's worth it for me to show up as a citizen because I see the value of what's going on here. And it's like when people go, when anybody who does any foreign travel, you take a 25, 26-year-old, send them out in the world for foreign travel, they come back like, holy crap, man. You should
Yeah,
have seen what,
right. Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God. And they come back changed because they've got different information. They've got different way of seeing things. And now they say, this may not work, this may not be perfect, and it may not work, but oh my God, compared to this place.
Right. That's true. Right.
And
I remember that experience. Yeah.
yeah, and so getting people to travel and getting to see different ways, but you don't just hunker down and, you know, wherever and just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Your perspective doesn't change.
Yeah.
It gets worse. It stagnates.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about these different parts of your personality, from on the left-hand side, warrior, going from left to right, warrior, cowboy, teacher, minister, artist. Do you see some of those different parts of your personality evolving and emerging and becoming dominant in different phases of your life? How do you think of the trajectory of the different chapters of your life, and when, the teacher, the minister, the artist, fully emerged?
William, I think they were there. They were parts of me, but um, I was never necessarily valued for those. I was never given a chance to learn about those things. And I was never learned, for example, being a warrior. Okay. Being a warrior doesn't mean going around beating people up. It doesn't mean what being a warrior means standing, this, there's a value here, there's some truth here, and I'm going to stand up for it. And if I have to push back on that, then I'm going to push back on that. I don't just give away the world here. But I didn't know how to be a cowboy without being irresponsible. I didn't know how to be a creative person without limiting my ways of being. I had to be an artist or a singer. I always say schools teach you basically two things, boys, two things. You can't sing and you can't draw. Those are two. It takes a long time to beat it into you, but you basically, by the time you're done, you can't sing and you can't draw. And so when we, when we,
or sit still for that matter, right?
yeah, no, but so how do we sing songs at camp? We sing them like they're just crazy things. They're just wonderful things to play with and to
Yeah.
bounce on and stand on chairs and scream your guts out. And then immediately you go from country roads to sit down and sing The Rose, and it's like that's the best part, is that transition when they move from this loud, raucous, crazy, frenetic, and then say, okay, can everybody sit down? and they just sit down and they're ready for the next experience, which could be very, very deep, very heavy, very spiritual, very loving, but it doesn't just, there's some discipline, there's some structure, and and we can have fun with the structure. The structure is not our enemy. Structure is our friend. And if we can learn to do that, then we can. I say to my kids at camp, you let me sleep through rest hour, and then see what it's like to live with me the rest of the day. And then you keep me awake during rest hour and see what it's like to live with the rest of the day. And then you decide what you want, because I need
That's
my
very good.
sleep. And
Yeah.
they'd be, oh, shh, let him get to sleep, get him to sleep, let him get to sleep. Quiet, quiet. Yeah, no, it's just a level of all the things we know about discipline and all the things we know about love. And we're spiritual beings going through a human experience, and that's really important to remember. And you can get that other side going backwards the wrong way, and it gets all screwed up. It gets all screwed up.
And do you mean that in the literal sense, the sense of God type spirituality? I don't know a lot about your sense of faith or how you think
Yeah,
about that, but yeah.
but I think we come from the light. We come from I mean, this part of this, what's going on. I have a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and um, um, where did I come from? Where did I come from, and where am I going? And there's that quote. We are not spiritual beings going through human. We're not human beings going through a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings going through a human experience. And it takes certain different rules and certain different behaviors to be a human being. But now, as I move back into the light, those are not things I need anymore. In fact, I have to offload those, and I don't need that to go back. I don't need anything. I can let all this ego go. I can let all this stuff, because that's the next journey. That's the next part, is to go back. Somebody sent me something about, what's the phrase? It was, I close my eyes and weep with joy that I was alive and blessed beyond measure. I might well be headed back to the incomprehensible love in which I came mewling many years ago. And, that incomprehensible love is, I don't care what you want to call it.
Yeah,
I can live with incomprehensible love. And
yeah.
it's something that's there, and it's something that I didn't create it. I don't have to understand it. I don't have to control it. I get to work with it. I get uh, to respond and to be part of it. It's not something apart from me. I'm a part of that. And I was talking about to this guy the other day. I thought, what a difference between the two of us. And he said, well, I think about dying, and I think about going into the darkness and going into the abyss. And I think, holy shit, that's the way I think about it all. I think about going into the light and going into the letting go. So you can
Mm.
imagine his sense of what it's like to be dying versus my sense of like to be dying is like totally different. You
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
darkness and the abyss. No, no, you're moving into the light, man. This is the best. You're yeah, you get to let go of this stuff. You get to feel, um, I said to people, my next move is into pure spirit. And to make that transition, I have to figure out two things. Well, how do I want to live before I get there? And how do I live? What do I want to do when I get there? And see, I love questions like that. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm a voracious learner. Give me a question like that, I will just be happy as a clam, just molding it over and thinking about it. And how can I do it well? And then what I've been able to do is I've been able to share that, um, mostly through Caring Bridge, and people have said, this is really helpful. This is
Yeah.
really, I hadn't thought about it this way, or I hadn't, this is really, and that's been a joy, because that's that teacher. That's the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can teach people even though I can't teach people. I can,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a structure, but I do have a structure. So, and I can teach people just by being who I am. And that's a gift. That's a damn gift.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so it's really exciting. I mean, it's probably one of the most exciting times of my life, really. It's just because I know when
Wow.
I'm going to die. I know how I'm going to die. I know I have chance to make all these, to touch base on all these relationships and finish them off. I
Yeah.
have a chance.
Wow.
I was just talking to a friend whose father is in a like a residential community, and he has two 24-hour aides with him every 24 hours, two every 8 hours switch. And he's just going through, I mean, he's happened to be very wealthy, but he's going through millions of dollars,
Yeah.
millions of
Yeah.
dollars. And I
Yeah.
get to take, I know I can leave my kids the money I have. I'm not going to sit there and waste away in some place that's going to just suck my money up. And um, I said to Adam this morning, this is about the best as it gets. If you're going to die, this is about as good as it gets. You get to have these conversations. Um, there was a point where one of my family members was just came in and said, "Dad, I haven't begun to think about what it's going to be like to lose you," and was just in tears. And the beauty was, I was here to hold him for that. I
Yeah.
was here to hug him through that, to be here, to
Yeah.
go through that experience rather than just some random act of dying that just left him alone and me alone. This is just it's a
Yeah.
conversation. It's a journey together. The family is going on this journey together. It's just the best. It's just another opportunity to to be a good human being, to be happy, and to teach other people how to be happy. And that's really what I want to do, is help people to be your best self. When you're your best self, if you're in a situation that's not the situation you want to be in, and you're not the person you want to be, you're in pain. You're in a lot of pain. But if you're in a situation where you don't want to be and you're the person you want to be, it's still not the situation you want, but you're not in pain. You're just not in pain.
Wow. Yeah.
You just, it's like, this is what's going on. I mean, this is the best I can do, is to be a man of integrity, is to be a man of love, is to be a man of strength, is to be a man of hope, is to be a man of, and if I can do that, which is not always easy, but if you practice, like Arnold Palmer said, some guy yelled out from the crowd when he hit this 40-foot butt. He said, "Wow, lucky shot." He says, "Yeah." He says, "But I've noticed that the more I practice, the luckier I get."
That's yet another amazing Barnes Boffey aphorism. That if you're the person you want to be, even in a situation you don't want to be in, you're happier than if you're in the situation you want to be in, but you're not the person you want to be. That's I won't forget that.
No, it's
Um,
it's it's true. Yeah.
the so one of your three phases of life you identified as having a big impact on you was your time in Yugoslavia as a teacher. Um, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was back in the 80s, and it was an extension of the ideas that I was learning with Glasser in terms of it was called reality therapy back then. And he went over to Zagreb he was a renowned psychiatrist with Adler and all those, Glasser, Adler, all those people were. And he went over and did a workshop, and then the people wanted to be trained. So then he'd come over and he'd have his um, his faculty come over. In this case, it was me and this other woman, and to train the people. Well, it was Yugoslavia then; it was communist, and so there wasn't. It was a 2% inflation rate a day. It was like they gave us spending money. If you go to a mint, they give you they print out bills, and they put them in cellophane wrapped things about 4 inches deep and maybe a foot wide and 2 feet long. They gave us one of those as spending money while we were there. I mean, it was ridiculous. And there's nothing to buy anyway. So these people were just about and they were for the most part still stuck in a lot of Freudian stuff, a lot of Freudian concepts, a lot of,
Hmm. Hmm.
they hadn't even jumped into stimulus response, and they hadn't even jumped into Skinner a lot of
The,
times.
the the behavioralist stuff, yeah.
Yeah, behavior. And so they were just the most wonderful people and simple and wonderful. And um, they were selfless. They were just, when you get around somebody who's more generous than you are and you go,
Yeah.
oh
Right.
my God, look at that. I thought I was generous, but holy crap, that's what true generosity looks like. You get around with somebody who's humble and you go, oh man, I didn't even know that. I didn't even
Yeah.
know that could
Yeah.
exist. Well, these people were humble and thoughtful and loving. They didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And uh,
Huh.
they were just, we would we would work with them, and it was so funny because they'd have their own, when you say back then, let's stop for a cup of coffee, the coffee break could last an hour and a half. I mean, literally, these folks would just, there was no sense of, it was it was the end of the communist, and it was just breaking down like crazy. And so we had to go over and say, okay, Perry said, I know what we'll do. We'll tell them we're going to run training just like we do in America. And they go, oh, okay. Okay, we're going to get trained just like they do in America. And so coffee breaks would be 20 minutes long or whatever. And we, they worked really hard. And we had translators. They were not translators that took off every half an hour. They were informal translators who just worked their hearts off. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you just see, remember the movie End of the Space Odyssey when the computer is no longer able to speak? Well,
Yeah.
that's the way their brains would get after translating all day long. They just couldn't speak anymore. They just couldn't form words anymore. They were so tired. And so the result, we went there 5 or 6 times, I think. And the beautiful part was that there was a Serbo-Croat war,
Mhm.
and people said to us, thank God you guys have been here, because without these ideas, my family would be a wreck. I wouldn't know what I was doing. I would not be able to lead my community. I would just be, everything would be terrible. And so we collected about 10 instructors from the Institute who all came over for no charge, paid their own way. And we ran this conference. And for all the people who had been there, but also anybody else who wanted to come to teach these ideas to people, because they said, these ideas saved my life. These ideas saved my life. And so the thing I remember most, and I think I read you that poem, if it just came to mind, was we were sitting there, and um, word came through that Zagreb was being bombed. Okay. And that would be, well, if you're in New York City, that would be like hearing that Yonkers was getting bombed. Okay. Or that some, 20, 40 miles away in New Jersey was getting bombed. So there were people who had family there. There were people, whatever. And we were in the middle of this training. And I thought, what do you do? You know, how do you resolve this? Do you sit here? Do you talk? Do you keep going? Do you stop and say, everybody go home? Do you stop? And how do you handle this? What do you do when you're in this situation? And I wrote this poem, which I'll read to you, if it's okay.
Oh, wonderful.
Um, Kilometers away, there are shells of fear and death landing in the lives of people I do not know. And as I sit here and wonder about being here, I think about them there and me here, and them here and me there. And I try to make sense of the tragedy and stupidity. Without a way to make sense and give meaning, this reality becomes a place of hopelessness, the stuff of despair. To make sense of the senselessness and create meaning in the meaninglessness is the heart of dignity, of hope, of compassion. I'm not afraid to die, of that I am sure, but to die without dignity, of that I am afraid. To create dignity is to do what God has asked me to do, and to do it even in situations where others have forgotten about dignity and being and God and others. My God job is to teach the world the thinking of peace, of that I am sure. But with the thinking of war, we create war, and with the thinking of peace, we create peace. Perhaps in this room is a voice that will lead this country out of its sadness. Perhaps in this room is a voice that will spark the light of wisdom in the darkness of ignorance. Surely in this room there are those who will help to weave the fabric of peace that is even now being designed in our hearts and minds. When I think I need to be somewhere else to be of more use, I realize that if I were to leave, I would not be here to support that voice, and that would be the greatest loss of all. I'm here to be with you, for here we create peace and love and dignity. From here, we must begin to share the light of truth. It can only begin with me. It can only begin with us. And that was really a, a really kind of transformational moment, and really that
Wow.
it's not a straight line. It's never a straight line, Rufus. You don't
And
know.
how old were you when you wrote that?
95, so I was 50 years old.
50, right?
Yeah.
And since then, and the beginning of the poem, you talk about, um, not being ready to having feeling like you have a lot more work to do. Do you still feel like you have a bunch more work to do?
Now,
Yeah.
no, no. I feel like the image came to my mind the other day. No matter what, you go to a party, good food, wonderful people, great party, music, whatever you want to be. It's a great party. But at some point, you're ready to go home.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
stay till the very end. You just some point say, okay, I've had enough. I mean, I've
Yeah.
done. It's time to go home. And if somebody said, well, we can work it out so you can stay 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes, you go, I don't want to stay 10, 15 more. I want to go home. I've done my this part has been a wonderful damn party. It's been great. And part of having it be a wonderful party is knowing when to leave. And when I got this diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, we went to the hospital to have some consults with different doctors. So was I going to go the get well route with chemo and operations and stuff like that, or was I going to go the hospice route and just say, okay, this is where it's headed? And so my ex-wife was with me, and we went to 2 days of conferences. And I I said to her at the end, am I missing something, or is it pretty clear it's the hospice route? And I know she would have loved it to be the other one, but she said, no, this is a no-brainer. This is the way we want to go. And what sustained me, honestly, through much of that was this voice that was inside me that says, you've done what I asked you to do, and now it's time to come home. And it was the um, most loving feeling I can have in my home. I mean, just you've done what I asked you to do, and now it's time to come home. And so that's what it feels like. It feels like getting ready to come home. And so it's just a wonderful feeling. So
Well, it seems like the one other thing that you're doing here is continuing your long legacy of teaching by helping to teach the rest of us how to approach death, and how to think about it. And and so maybe that's a final project, right? And being intentional about
and not
sharing your experience.
and not to wait. Don't wait, because I've been thinking about this stuff. I've been thinking about this stuff since I was 26. And so this is not, there are not a lot of new thoughts. The miracle is that I'm not afraid. That's a fucking miracle when it comes down to thinking about the role that fear has played in my life. Um, I'm just not afraid. And so I've been thinking, I asked my students, for some reason, I've always been sort of thinking, I thought, I got to think about this stuff now. This is not, they say, well, you're going to die, and it's got to I can get ready for this now. I don't have to get gloomy about it or whatever. But on one side of an index card, I asked my students in this college course I was teaching, um, how do you feel about death? And I said, okay, now turn it over and write, how would you like to feel about death? And see, most people don't ever ask them questions. They say, how do I feel
Yeah.
about it? But how would I like to feel about it? And the answer I gave myself at that moment was when I was 26 or 28 years old, probably maybe 30 years old, was I'd like to feel as unafraid about where I'm going as I am about where I came from. And that was again very comforting. I guess if I work on that, so then you work on that for 30 years, and you know what? Pretty soon you feel that way. And so it's yeah, I like to share what I'm sharing and let people make whatever choice they want to. That's the whole point, is they get to choose what they want to do with that. They can ignore it, they can think about it, they can chew on it, they can see it as, but it's my job to speak my truth, and it is as well as I can, and to say, here's what I'm going through, because I know some of you will find this helpful. Some of you will find this helpful. So it's been a lovely experience. The feedback I've gotten has been more than any human being is entitled to. I mean, the loving letters, the loving it's just more than anybody should be entitled to. It's wonderful. Yeah.
You know, the uh, I remember having. I think there may be uh, uh, a little bit of a collective fantasy around attending one's own funeral,
Yeah.
right? Because it always seems like a pity. Like, why would you have all these wonderful things said about people and not have them
Right.
hear them? And
Yeah.
and it sounds like that's part of the process that you're going through in engaging with people in this way through this website, and just through communications with your community is like that, right? And hearing how much you've touched so many different people, um, is powerful, and that seems like it's the way that it should be done.
It really is wonderful. And it's funny because I wrote, there's this other friend of ours who's dying. And I wrote on just a book group that I'm with. I said, just so you know, um, from my own experience, if he's going to, just write him a note. Tell him what influence he had in your life. Tell him, just doesn't have to be right, doesn't have to be good. Just tell him. And one guy wrote that, but he also wrote me and said, I haven't told you about what you've meant to me and how that's changed my life. And so it was good to just say, this is a good thing to do. If you think somebody's not going to tell them. And one of the things I loved was this one counselor came up to me and said, he said, I remember something you told me, 25 years ago. He said, you asked me if I were going to die in 48 hours, who would I call? What would I say? And why am I waiting? And it's really true. I mean,
Yeah,
who am I call? What would I call and what would I say? And I've tried to live that. And so I'm up to date. I'm up to
yeah.
date.
And
I'm
so
up,
you haven't felt in since this diagnosis came in that you had a bunch of unfinished business in terms of relationships, because you're saying you've been living that way for decades,
yeah,
trying to. So you've been asking sort of the deathbed question, you know, what would I do?
right.
Who would I call? What would I say, for decades? And that seems like a great way to live for all of us, right? Is that, you
I
know,
think so.
it's I think it was an old Native American saying, um, live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. And somebody said the other day, how are you? And I said, well, I'm trying to fill my life with so much love and light that the tumor has no place to grow. And it just has no place to grow. So it's just, I can't tell you what a joyful experience it is. What an opportunity it is. It's just wonderful. And anyway,
It's so extraordinary to hear you use those words, because I don't think I've ever heard the process of approaching one's own death described that way. Um, my father said to me once that he thought, he'd always bring up, well, when I'm gone, I'd say, Dad, you're a frisky 72-year-old or whatever. Now he's 80, but why? You're so morbid. Please stop talking about when you're gone. He's like, no, 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 Rufus, we don't talk about death enough, and we don't accept it as part of our lives. And that leads to a lot of problems.
It's true.
It's much better to be accepting of this as part of our journey. And I wonder about the ways in which our denial about, death, which is of course in front of all of us, all the negative ways that that affects people. There's a kind of frenetic, running around trying to make the best of every minute. There's this sort of like fear of death, it seems to me, that haunts most people and winds them up and causes them maybe to be chasing the wrong things because they have to get everything done,
Right.
get everything done while they can with this finite amount of time, and somehow accepting much earlier in our lives that, hey, death is coming, it's part of the process. uh does that sound right to you? Do you see a lot of a lot of people, even very young people, have in the back of their minds this sort of fear of death that somehow is
Oh yeah, I don't want to talk. My kids used, and I said to them very early, I said, just so you know, I mean, we started those conversations at 12 and 14. I just said, just so you know, I mean, we know death, we talk about death. And I said, I'm probably going to take my own life. Um, and, uh, and whatever we talk about that. They say, Dad, do we have to talk about this? I say, no, only until you're comfortable with it. After you're comfortable with it, we don't have to talk about it anymore. But
great.
until you're comfortable with the fact that this is real and it's not something we have to be afraid of, and if we can do it well, just the way you can do it well, just the way you can do anything else well. It's not something different. It's not something. It's just it's this great the five Buddhist things about we are of the nature to become sick. It is our nature to die. It's our nature to be separated from other people. It's just the nature of things. But we get so afraid we want to take control of things we can't take control of. I mean that's what I love, the serenity prayer. God grant me the accept, what is it? God
Yes.
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And just to accept what I can't change. I mean, it's okay. I don't have to control everything. There's this thing called the universe out there that seems to have some kind of a handle on things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's also this factor of like what matters, and I've always found the deathbed perspective to be helpful in there's a book that I've never read, but I read the title, and I like to think that there's some books uh, uh, that transmit 99% of the wisdom in the book in the title itself, so you don't actually
Right.
have to read those books.
Oh,
This one, the title was "Don't Sweat." The title was "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff." Parentheses. It's all small stuff.
right,
The only edit I might make there is it's almost all small stuff,
right. Yeah, right.
right?
Except the
But
stuff that's not right.
right.
Except the
But
stuff
do
that's
you,
not.
in the last few years, I mean, certainly you've known, we all know as we get older that we have finite time. Have you found over the course of your life as you've gotten older, and then now more recently with the diagnosis, that it's impacted what you consider to be worthy of your time, how you think about how you spend your time?
Well, it goes back to asking the who do you want to be question. So how I phrase that. You are so I spend I decided for a couple of years ago I want to spend my time with nourishing people who tell me the truth. For nourishing people, you have to tell me the truth. And if you're not on that list, that's probably not going to be a place I spend a lot of time. And the other thing I heard was this comedian talking about, he said, people say relationships are hard. They're not that hard when both people work at them. He said, it's pretty easy to take a couch across the room if both people lift it. But if only one person carries the couch across the room, it's really hard. So then I figured out, okay, what relationships in my life am I the only one carrying the couch? and in those relationships, I put the couch down. Doesn't mean I don't like them. Doesn't mean I don't love them. Just means I'm not carrying this damn couch alone. When you're ready to pick up your end, we'll be good here. So and then there are relationships where you give because you're generous and because people need time. And there are relationships where you give because you need something. And I always get something anyway. But it's not just about me. And there are people who need to talk to me because they need to talk to me. They want to say something. I don't necessarily need to be a part of that, but I need to be present. I need to hear them. I need to see them. Again, it goes back so much to being seen. And I think that that's what camp taught me. And um, you see a 16-year-old, you see an 18-year-old, you see a kid who's in trouble, you see a kid who's struggling, and you see him. And all of a sudden he's safe. Somebody saw me. I'm not just a number. I'm just, and so then there are people, and I'm just so aware of the people I love and the people who love me, and you love people in different ways. And my ex-wife is probably my angel and my rock right now. We've been divorced since 1989, but and I've been in and out of two different major relationships since then. But we have still maintained our family through it all, and our family is stronger now than it's ever been. And her role of caretaker, and she's fabulous at it. She's just and she likes it. She loves it, and I love it too. She's just wonderful. So, but who would have thought that in 1989 when we were divorced, arguing about
Yeah.
money and arguing about kids and arguing about houses and arguing about whatever? But both people have to want it, and
Yeah.
and I've wanted it all the way through, and um, she's wanted it. It's easy. This is easier for her when it's not clouded by another relationship or whatever. But it's really wonderful. She's just been fabulous, as have my kids. We have these conversations, and I read them something and I write from Caring Bridge or whatever, and then we're sitting in the living room crying together. It's like, but we're crying together.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sad. It's not necessarily just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
And that's a huge shift in thinking. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's just hard. Doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
bad. And
And
so, yeah.
what advice on relationships would you give to your younger self? Do you think when you look back on it, you went through a few marriages? Do you think, are we cut out to be monogamous? Do you think that uh, do you do you have regrets with how your relationships have gone over the years, or you feel like it all played out the way that it should
I
have?
have regrets. I mean, things, acts of commission, acts of omission. I didn't get it right. I learned. I think I'm leaving. I leave all those relationships in very good stead. I love those people. They love me. We talk, we connect, we communicate. Um, it just wasn't, at some point, it was time, we crossed and we had this wonderful time together. And then we were going just different, you don't, when you cross at that X of
Yeah.
meeting, you don't know what the other person's trajectory is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes you're going in different directions, but you just happen to cross. And sometimes you're going the same direction, you kind of weave, but you don't know where they're. And so we just had different roads to travel. And it was sad and it was hard, but so what? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, it doesn't mean you stop loving people. It just means you have to get better at it. And I'm better at it. But even if I had, and right now, the clear thing for me to do is to be living alone. There's not even a question in my mind. I mean, it's the right
Right.
thing to be doing. And for one reason, simply just because I call so many audibles in a day about my schedule or my, bam, okay, we're not doing that. Okay, change this. Oh no, you're not. No, you're not going to have dinner. You're going to have that. Whatever. Just
Yeah.
so many audibles. It would drive somebody crazy to be around that all the time.
And that a little bit of the cowboy?
No, it's more the The cowboy wants to go on that 50-mile bike ride. Yesterday, my son and I went out on a bike ride. And that was one of the things on my bucket list because I bought a new bike for him that we had both on e-bikes. So that was one of the things about, and then we got caught in a rainstorm, just the way you did when you were 9 years old.
Yeah.
We got soaked. I mean, we got soaked. But that was on my bucket list, man. Just to come home in the rain and the warm rain and walk in the house and take off your clothes and just be,
Perfect.
it was perfect. It was just, that's the cowboy. The
Yeah.
cowboys, we're not gonna hide under a tree. We're gonna be in the, I want to get soaked. I haven't done that since I was 16 years old, or being on a camping trip in the middle of Lake Umbagog somewhere, and all of a sudden the skies open up and there was no place to go. You were
Yeah.
just going to get soaked. That was it,
Yeah.
baby
Yeah.
cakes. You were going to
Absolutely.
get soaked.
Absolutely.
And you could either, so you're going to get soaked. You want to enjoy it or you want to be angry the rest of the way across the lake. And those choices all the time choices, all the time.
Yeah.
So if we're going to close, I'm ready to be done. And
Okay.
it's been one of
Okay.
the
Great.
most this has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation, man. It's such a gift for you to do this. And and it's just, I don't want to try and squeeze too much out of it. We've
Yeah.
just
I
had,
think we've covered it.
yeah.
I do. No, it's just it's for me a beautiful conversation, and I think for everybody who listens a beautiful conversation. And as always, thank you so much for giving so much of yourself to the rest of us.
And you too, Rufus. You too. You're a beautiful man, and I respect you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Barnes. Love you.
Take care, my
Have a
friend.
great rest of your day.
We'll talk again.
Yes, we shall.